We are being joined by senior Congress leader Dr. Shashi Tharoor. Dr. Shashi Tharoor, congratulations. You have won the Thiruvananthapuram seat for the 4th straight term. So, sir, it's certainly a big victory for you. I want to start by asking you that we have seen confrontation between the opposition and government from the word go. Do you see any scope for this acrimony going down going forward?
I certainly hope so, because it's in the government's interest as well that they should focus on cooperation and conciliation rather than confrontation and clashes with the opposition. This is no longer a small number of MPs that you can just roll over with a brute majority. This is a very large swathe of Indian public opinion represented in these elections. And we're talking about 234 members in the India Alliance alone, as well as others who are not affiliated to the government. I think the government has every interest in cooperating. And if they take that step forward, I'm sure that we will meet them halfway. The problem often is that the government acts as if they don't really need to consult the opposition. And that, I believe, would be very unwise.
Dr. Tharoor, the Congress and other opposition leaders have protested against the Speaker's resolution on emergency. Why do you object to it?
Well, first of all, there's some question as to why it's relevant to dredge up a matter that occurred 49 years ago. It is, after all, part of the kind of past, the political past of our country from which we have all evolved and moved on. And it would seem to me that we should be focusing on the problems of today and tomorrow. But this business of the government constantly moving the goalposts, whether it is to 1975 when talking about the emergency or to 2047 when talking about the future, and not focusing on the problems of 24 and 25, that seems to me to be somewhat, shall we say, diversionary. What we need in our politics is to focus on the problems of today. The young people of today, people facing serious unemployment, people facing this catastrophic confusion over the NEET examinations, people facing the kinds of difficulties that every ordinary Indian is living with day after day. And then, of course, there are other issues that government has never debated. Manipur was a word that never escaped the Prime Minister's lips or the President's. We've heard nothing about the tensions on the India-China frontier. There are so many national issues that the government wants not to talk about. And instead, they're raising the emergency from 49 years ago, with not even the convenience of a round number anniversary to talk about. Why is this so relevant today? But,
Dr. Tharoor, observers will say that BJP raking up emergency is essentially to blunt the opposition, that is the Congress's constitution attack. Isn't that just fair politics to use whatever tool you can against your opponents?
The irony is that's actually one thing the BJP could not accurately say, because actually, and I'm a critic of the emergency, many of you have read my books and writings against the emergency in subsequent years, but the very fact is that the emergency may have been undemocratic, but it was not unconstitutional. It was a provision in the Constitution that permitted the imposition of an internal emergency. That provision has since been removed, but it was there at the time, and therefore what was done by the government in 1975 was strictly within the boundaries of the Constitution. So for the Rashtrapati to say it was an unconstitutional attack or an attack on the Constitution is actually inaccurate in legal terms. Now, I'm not supporting the emergency. I think arresting opposition politicians, censoring the press, a number of steps taken were undemocratic steps. But they were sadly not unconstitutional steps.
But suspension of constitution is what happened during those 21 months.
No, the constitution was very much in place. Everything was done according to the constitution. Even the notorious 42nd Amendment was passed within the provisions of the existing system. So I'm not saying that anything is something to be proud of. I don't think we should be debating the emergency and politics today when there are more important things to do. But I'm just challenging the claim that it was unconstitutional. It was not. It was completely within the Constitution. However undesirable all of us may see it as being today.
Dr. Tharoor, talking of emergency, obviously it was a dark chapter in India's history. Can Congress ever escape the blame for that?
Look, if the BJP government doesn't want to talk about the Gujarat killings of 2002, why is it that it's only when the Congress presides over anything wrong happening in the country that it's fair game to talk about? I think in many cases it's time we moved on from this meh, tu, blaming of the past that takes place far too easily in our politics, and focus on the real issues of the nation. Why can't we hear more about what the government is prepared to do on unemployment? The Congress party had some very specific plans, and BJP should have different plans of its own or take our plans. We don't mind, but we need action. We need to ensure that young people in this country find work to do. This is a real urgent issue. Why won't the government address it? It seems to me rather bizarre that we're sitting here today in 2024 talking about 1975 when we could be discussing the actual challenges facing the people, the voters, the young citizens of today.
So, is Sangal and the entire controversy erupting around it an issue which is of concern to the people of India today? You heard from Samajwadi Party MP and your own party man in party MP in Manikam Tagore backing him that Sangal should be removed.
Look, I mean, this is a debate I personally don't wish to enter into because I can see the arguments on both sides. One, that it's a symbol of monarchy and we are a republic, so why do we need it? And the other saying it's a purely symbolic thing. It sort of comprises, if you like, an attribute of sovereignty, and it's an Indian traditional thing from a different part of India that should be honored here in the national parliament. And I don't really want to pick and choose between these two things. I will say, however, that right now what the Congress party and the opposition are focused upon are the real issues facing people today, which certainly to my mind include NEET. As you said rightly at the beginning of your show, a large number of youth Congress activists from all over the country came to protest in Delhi and got rather badly beaten up in the course of their protests. We're concerned about that. We're concerned about the extraordinary confusion surrounding the entire NEET examination process. We're concerned about unemployment, particularly for young people. And we are concerned very, very seriously about some of the issues the government simply doesn't want to talk about, from Manipur to the India-China border. So let's talk about the real issues.
Okay, Dr. Tharoor, talking about emergency, that much debated 39th Amendment that kept the election of President, Vice President, Prime Minister, Speaker outside the purview of judiciary. So doesn't the Congress party's safe constitution pitch at the moment sound hollow?
Look, I mean, we're going around the same points in circles, Maria. I will say to you quite simply that saving the Constitution is a national necessity in any case. When we heard this ab ki baar 400 par over and over again, and when half a dozen BJP candidates, whom you and I can name, actually said in speeches in their constituencies that we need such a large number in order to amend the Constitution, obviously we put two and two together and began to worry, because while the Constitution has been amended 100 times, it has always been amended by consensus. No government needed 400 seats in order to amend the Constitution, because the constitutional amendments that came up reflected the temper of the times and usually had the agreement of the main opposition parties too. Now, when you're saying you want a number that will enable you to amend the Constitution without even consulting the opposition parties, that suggests that you have some sinister plans. And that's why we all said, no, we have to protect this Constitution as it is. That was the context in which this whole issue came up. Now, if the government wants to assure the nation they have no plans to amend the Constitution, we can move on. Why do they want to discuss what happened in 1975? Let's talk about the practical problems they're not addressing today.
That brings me to my last question. Rahul Gandhi is now the leader of opposition, the first constitutional post he has ever held. How do you see this, and what advice will you give him?
Look, I think Rahul Gandhi has emerged as a considerable leader in his own right. It started off in many ways that the sort of churning or turning of the narrative began with the two Bharat Jodo Yatras, particularly the first one, which seized the imagination of the nation and of young people everywhere. Moved on from there, I think, into this very effective campaigning for the Lok Sabha elections of 24. And I think his ability to now not just frame the narrative, but to do so in a way that appeals to and attracts large numbers of people is beyond dispute. So I would say that he doesn't need any advice from the likes of me. What he needs is now the opportunity to use the platform of being leader of the opposition to set the agenda for the government to respond to, and to ensure that the government is kept on the nation's business rather than, frankly, distracting us with what are really not relevant debates. You know that a vast majority of the Indian population wasn't even born when the emergency was declared.
That's right.
It is something for them that's part of history. Let's not go into history all the time. We've already had this government. Every time you raise an issue, they talk about an 18th century mosque or temple. They talk about 2047 on the other side of the goalposts. There just isn't enough effort to focus on the problems of today and tomorrow. That's what we want them to do. And if they do that, we'll be there working with them to solve.
All right, Dr. Shashi Tharoor, pleasure speaking to you. Thank you so much for your time here on NDTV.